Okay, well, in this talk, I'll be looking at the surviving art of the Cathars, and I'll begin with the background and go on to the Albigensians in the Languedoc and the Bogomils in Bosnian, and after that, I'll look at Bosch, who, as Elizabeth had said, has some connection with the tombstones. So this map shows locations and dates of what could be called the Cathar family. They all had similar Gnostic or dualist beliefs. And they have these names you can see: Manichaeans, Paulicians, Bogomils, and Albigensians. And the reason they're known as dualists is that they all believed in two powerful deities: the god of light in the heavenly realm, ah, and Satan, the god of darkness who ruled the earth. So, according to their mythology, Satan, who they thought of as God's eldest son, had once been the most powerful angel in heaven. He fell to earth after losing the battle to replace his father as the top ruler, and he fell along with his army of fallen angels who were transformed into demons as they fell. We'll see this in at least one of the pictures. Um, so now, so this Manichaean cross of light, this cross is also known as the Greek cross sometimes, but so it's not unique to the dualists, but it was extremely important to them, as we'll be seeing tonight. They saw it as a symbol of the head of the Savior, whom they identified with Jesus, who was supposed to be the youngest brother of Satan. He chose to come down to earth. Satan was expelled to earth. And his cross, related to his head, is radiating light in all directions. And they believed he'd actually been sent by the God of light in order to rescue human souls, which had fallen along with the angels of Satan. So this cross is very important, and it's an a symbol of hope in a dark world. You'll see it in many of the pictures. This is a rather blurry, enlarged picture of a gloss from um, the Cathar Secret Book, which is there are not many that survive from the Inquisition, but it's very important because it talks about Satan, Christ, creation, and the future of the world, the end of the world. My phone keeps, I'll turn it off. Um, and anyhow, in this enlarged head that I've got, you can't make it out too well, but you can see two things. One is this head that has a cruciform halo, so that would represent Jesus traditionally in Christianity. And then below is this cross of light, radiating light, and again, symbolic of his head. Um, so one of the Cathars who was reading this secret book made this gloss in it. Um, so now, moving on, Italy. The map on the right, I don't know how well you can see it, but the relevant part is the bottom of this lake, Garda, Sirmione. So in Italy, they're not nearly as well known as the Albigensians of the Languedoc, but by the uh, middle of the 12th century, they'd become very important, as were the other Cathars. And so they were a threat to the traditional church because the church actually was being outstripped by the Cathars. So they felt they had to eliminate Catharism, and they set to work sometime after 1208. And their methods combined attacks by soldiers, and then after that, the Inquisition, which was extremely cruel, as has been said. So in Italy, where there had been a lot in the Lombardy in the north, they some went across the water, the Adriatic Sea, to Bosnia, and others went south to Sirmione, which was a Cathar area for a while. And many of them hid in the local woods, where some of the remaining items, there are a lot of scratchings on stones there, but some could well be Cathar, and an example is the one that you see on the left, incised on a stone from the woods. And it's in the museum in Sirmione. So at first it might look like a Latin cross, but it's actually different, partly because of this stone at the bottom, which represents the earth or the world of matter. And this would be the Jesus, who can be seen as very large, sort of the cosmos, or very small, personal. So this would be Jesus as the cosmos coming out of the earth. And now we move on to the Languedoc. So there's certainly more art that remains in the Languedoc than there is in Italy, where there's very little. And Languedoc is the southern part of France, as I'm sure you all know. And by the 13th century, Catharism was so widespread there that it was said by the Inquisition that the traditional churches were deserted and no one honored the Latin cross or the clergy. So this was, from the church's point of view, a serious threat. First, they introduced this Albigensian crusade from 1208 to 29, which was very violent. And afterwards, they introduced the Inquisition, which was also very violent. And they put people in prison, they executed them. And by 1350, the church had probably won, so there wasn't very much left of Catharism in the south of France. And these, as I'm sure you know, are two Cathar castles. One on the left is Las Tours, and on the right, Puy-Lorraine, both in the Languedoc on hills. People think these are the Cathar castles as they were, but in fact, all of them were rebuilt by crusaders later on. But in any case, you get the general idea of what it must have looked like. And the castles were fortified and hard to reach because they were high up. So the nobles who owned them sheltered the local people during the Crusades from the north. But in the end, the Northern Crusaders did conquer them, and they were given the ownership of the properties. So it's mainly they who rebuilt these Cathar castles that we see. And one of the interesting places where they went was the Chateau of Roquefixade. Not much left of it now, but it's important because a large number of Cathars went there for protection during the Crusade. And down below, they were also in the town of Roquefixade. And if you can make this out, this is quite an important Cathar piece of art. It's carved on a beam of a house in Roquefixade, one assumes by a Cathar. Shows, as you can see, a deer, which is a traditional image of the soul, much used by the Cathars. It comes originally from Psalm 42, and it's being chased by a dog, which is, for the Cathars, is a symbol of demons and the demonic. So this goes along with the Cathar view that human souls had fallen from heaven along with Satan's angels and were now trapped on earth. We'll say more about that later. And while on earth, they were chased by demons. And this, I'm sure some of you will recognize, the Chateau of Montségur, aerial view and a distant view of the ruins on top of what they called the Pog, or hill. It fell to the Crusaders in 1244 after quite a long siege, and was one of the last Cathar strongholds to lose the fight. And it's probably the best known of all the Cathar castles, and some of you will have climbed it, I'm sure, up to there. But it is true that it isn't really quite as Cathar as people think, because it's been rebuilt, a lot of it. But a lot of excavation has been done in the area, and here are two examples. One on the left is an equal arm cross, this very much used symbol, showing the radiant head of the Savior. And on the right, it has another meaning, because first of all, it isn't the cross of the crucifixion, which the Cathars didn't go along with. They didn't believe that even that there was a real crucifixion. But if you see it as a Cathar image, it's the Savior with his arms outstretched and a gesture of welcome. And now this is quite a significant little stone. These are two Cathar tombstones. You can find them, I'm sure, even now at the edges of the graveyards, because the Cathars didn't mind using traditional church graveyards for their burials, although they were meant to be buried on the side. The Christians insisted on that. But they felt that the Cathars felt the physical body belonged to the earth. So I would think that for them to be buried in Satan's earth wouldn't be such a terrible thing. Anyhow, you can, as I say, find some of these gravestones even now. The one on the left is in the graveyard at Montmartre, and on the right, a museum at Montferrand. Some of them have been moved to museums. And they're both anthropomorphic crosses, as I'll be calling them, because they represent the Savior, and his head emits light rays, and it can either be shown as this cross that we've seen before, or a sunburst. I don't know how well you can make it out, but it's got all these different lines in it that represent the rays, and these are the arms. This one is shown emerging from a stone representing the earth, and presumably it hints at the soul's ability to escape its imprisonment in matter, and also to travel upwards to the realm of spiritual light with the help of the Savior. So you can either see him as a vast creature, or a vast person who sort of is as large as the universe, and he's in that form, he's the soul's route through the cosmos. But you can also see the Savior, if you're a Cathar, as more personal, and you have access. He came to Earth to help humanity escape. Now we move on to Bosnia, and in the slide on the right, you see 12 of 20 villages that had Bosnian tombstones, which are known as steki. I hope I'm pronouncing them right. I've always pronounced them steki. And they certainly are the largest number of Cathar tombstones that survive, and they're still in Bosnia, either in the villages or some have been moved to the museum in Sarajevo. As for the Bogomils themselves, a few scholars try to argue that they were not Cathar, but most people believe they were. I'm certainly on their side. And there's very good evidence that they were. I'll give you some of it. For one thing, the Franciscan envoys who were located in Bosnia, even though not very active, did talk about their beliefs that sound Cathar. And as I said earlier, the Bogomils, or the Patarines, as the Italian Cathars were called, across the Adriatic Sea, which you see here, would go back and forth. So they had contact with those Italian Cathars. And later on, with the Inquisition, as I said, the Cathars from Italy fled to Bosnia. And also, at the same time, some of the refugees from the Languedoc joined them. Bosnia was surprisingly safe. It was off the beaten track, and the Cathars, who were members of what was called the Bosnian Church, which again is known to be Cathar, were not persecuted. I think that's probably a lot of the reason is, well, first of all, there weren't many Franciscans who would have done it, would have persecuted them, but also it's quite difficult, as I found myself when we tried to get to see those tombstones. It's very hard to get to these different villages. It must have been even worse. I mean, when I went, there weren't many roads that had actual paving on them. So it must have been a lot harder in those days. So that's part of the reason that Catharism was safe there. Um, and the Franciscans who went to did some investigating, did report that attitudes to traditional Christianity was similar as it had been in the Languedoc when the churches were deserted. But no one paid much attention to this, and nobody really persecuted them. And this is their cemetery, one example of a cemetery of steki. And they're usually on the edge of a village, and they're very peaceful and set in beautiful countryside, as you can see here. So there are about 60,000 remaining steki, but of those, about 6,000 are decorated, which is really quite a few, actually. I mean, they often repeat themselves. They're not always different from each other. But they've now been listed as on the UNESCO World Heritage. And their dates, interestingly, correspond with the Bosnian church itself. That church originated in the mid 12th century, like these tombstones, and it peaked in the 15th century, which is when these steki had the most elaborate decorations. By the 16th century, the steki petered out, and the reason that's always accepted is that the Ottoman Turks arrived in Bosnia and took over, and they weren't violent, but they did convert the Bogomils to Islam. I think the Bogomils felt it was another religion that wasn't Christianity, so they didn't mind joining. But the Christians had persecuted them so badly, they didn't want to become Christian. Anyhow, the person who first connected these steki with the Bosnian church was Arthur Evans, the archaeologist who was traveling to Athens for doing his excavations there. And he was traveling by foot through Bosnia, and he's the first one who got the idea. But even so, their symbolism has never been fully explained. Presumably, I mean, we know they would presumably been made by the Bosnian Church, and so their symbols would correspond with Cathar ideas about life after death. As I said, there are about 20 graveyards in which that still has them, but they're very hard to find. So, you know, you have to have time to look and perseverance. But you can always see some in Sarajevo in the museum of the regional museum. And there's also one large graveyard in a town called Radomila near Dubrovnik where you can see them. Now, here's an example, one of them. So first of all, how do we get our ideas of the Cathar view of the afterworld? A lot of it comes from the Inquisition records from the Languedoc, which are quoted in the book Montaillou by Emmanuel Ladurie. Is one of the main sources I'm using for their ideas. And I think some people say the Inquisition forced the Cathars to say things they didn't believe, but my impression is that what they said was rather accurate, and the Inquisition wanted to know what they thought so that they could know who to persecute. So I would believe that what the Inquisition records myself, and certainly this book by Ladurie is very good. Anyhow, comes from the first stage, the earliest stage of the afterlife, and it's a scene of conflict. The souls in this early stage are restless and tormented, and it's demons or demonic forces that go after them. Now, in this scene, as I interpret it, these two figures on horses are demons fighting each other. And this third figure with a bow and arrow, I suspect might be more likely to be a human warrior because we'll later see pictures of human warriors who have a bow and arrow. Um, Anyhow, if it is that, which I think it is, he's fighting against the forces of evil. And here's another one, um, in which we see more of the tormented early phase up at the top, where a deer is being chased by a evil spirit, and a dog also aid to the evil spirits. Um, and this deer is, as I said earlier, is a symbol of the soul. And below it, there's an important vignette as well. And this is the dance called the kolo. I don't know if some of you have come across it, but it's also known in other Balkan countries. And there, I suspect they've forgotten its original meaning, but it's actually, although they're always shown as a line, it was a circular dance, and it symbolizes reincarnation. Um, and the Cathars felt, as we're going to see, that most souls, in order to stay in the next world, they had to lose their attraction to matter. Otherwise, they would fall back to Earth to another birth in a physical body. And so that's what this symbolizes, the rebirth due to falling back. Now, before they fell back, they would have a period of recovery. And this doesn't seem like much, but I think it's probably a symbol of what they called Satan's Earth, or Satan's Eden, rather. But it's a sort of surround, quite often shown that way. Here it is as a line in this other tombstone. Um, and it's often shown with flowers or brambles. That is Satan's Eden, where they went for recovery after this tormented period. It's also called the place of rest sometimes. So now the next slide shows warriors with the bow and arrow. That was what I thought, possibly that man with the bow and arrow was a warrior, and a little hole. That's quite important because that would be the entrance to the next world. I think he's meant to be on Earth, as I understand it. And what is his raised right hand? This figure often has a raised right hand. He's shown as a warrior with a bow and arrow and a raised right hand, but some people think it might be an oath, which I doubt, because Cathars didn't believe in oaths. They didn't think we should have an oath, swear an oath. I think it's more likely to be a sign that he's been successful and achieved and triumphed in his struggle with the forces of evil. And that would go along with having the bow and arrow. So presumably he represents the man who's buried below the stone, who's valiant. But as I see, he's below the strip of earth, strip of foliage, Satan's Eden. He will reach it through this hole, and then this is the next level to the higher heaven. Whether he goes through that will depend on whether he's attracted back to the earth. In this one, he's ascending, but he's still down in this lower level, so he's going to go through this hole. Here's his bow and arrow, and this is his family. Looks like two women. But his position is the erect position with the arms up, praying with your arms in the air, and that, I don't know how well you can make this figure out, but this is one stekak, and from it you see on the long side you see the kolo. You see, in this case, it's large, sort of evil-looking birds that are tormenting the soul. The kolo again, and here's the deers running. But on the other side, the short side, there's a figure ascending to the higher heaven, and below is with the line separating is a man with a horse. And here too, this is another dual. It's one tombstone. It has two sides. Um, and if I'm not mistaken, this one is in the museum. I think it almost certainly is. And I probably took this picture when there's some grass around. It's probably the grass of the museum. Anyhow, so this shows the two phases. On one, you get the pursuit of the soul from the earliest period. And there's also a little figure with an arrow, bow and arrow, which might be this warrior helping them out. But behind her, there's two, an evil bird and a dog, both attacking this deer. And on the left, there's a good sort of bird, doves. And the woman in this on the left seems to be ascending into the air with the doves around her. Can you see? I hope you can see these full tombstones. Oops. Anyhow, these are two that I particularly like. One, this is definitely in the museum, as I remember, and this is in a probably in a Cathar graveyard, but I'm not quite sure. Anyhow, they both show the ascent into the higher levels. And on the left, you can see it's sort of identified with the Savior, who's the symbol of the universe itself. And I don't know what the writing says because I can't read that language, but it would be interesting to know. Anyhow, above the arms of the Savior, we get the heavens, which have a hole, which is an entrance, and also a star. It could be a full moon. I'm not quite sure which it is, but I think it's more likely an entrance. But then above it is the real entrance to the land of light, the higher heaven. And in this case, it's sort of identified with the radiant head of the Savior. And on this side, on the right, um, again, I think this is a particularly good one. You see the cosmos with the stars and the moon. And then if you notice, there's a little path that leads from one of the stars to a kind of tunnel, which is the entrance to the Empyrean, or the land of light. Um, so that's what the sort of bullseye is. It's really meant to be a tunnel. And that leads me to Bosch. So first of all, was Bosch a secret Cathar hiding in plain sight? I think he was. He lived from 1460 to 1516. In Europe, there were still a few Cathars, and particularly in Venice, and there's some evidence that he visited Venice. But most of the Cathars were in Bosnia, as we know. I don't really know of any evidence to show he ever visited Bosnia, but I do think he was in Venice, not too far away. And who knows, he might have met some people who'd been in Bosnia. Anyhow, I take him as a Cathar. My evidence, such as it is, I know it's not brilliant, but I think he could have come from a family of secret Cathars, because if you know the history of his family, they had immigrated to the Netherlands from a place in Germany where there were Cathars. And also we're going to now look at them, his works, and see what's relevant in them that compares to the Cathars symbols we've already seen. That's another bit of evidence that he was a Cathar, that he used those symbols. But before that, I just want to talk about Bosch and the Catholic Church, or the Inquisition. He certainly, everything in his pictures, once you start looking at it, shows he really, really didn't like the Catholic Church. Although, as it was called, it wasn't yet called the Catholic Church. The Roman Church would be the accurate thing to call it. And this is from a triptych. I'm not showing the whole triptych, but details from the right outer wings, which I think can be interpreted as the Inquisition. So he also shows over and over again that he doesn't like the clergy, and here he shows them very hostile. This one is sort of capturing this victim who loses his lantern, which is symbolic in itself. And over here, there's another friar haranguing a victim who looks exhausted. And behind him is a man with a rope and another friar. If you look at his hat, it's actually got flames on it. And then this is another bit from the interior of that same. I won't go into detail just what it is, but it's a lot of scenes from the Old Testament, which again he didn't like. He showed as rather associated with not very pleasant creatures. And in it, I'm just pointing out this scene of a chase, which shows he sometimes did a chase through brambles. But now, another picture by Bosch, the stone operation. And in this, I think if you could talk, it would be interesting to hear your interpretations of it. But it's the traditional stone operation that isn't eccentric like his, shows a man being operated by a quack doctor who says, "Once I take out the stone, you will lose your stupidity." And so then they would put it on the table. But in fact, he's identified as Loberdas, which means stupid badger, and Bosch considers him to be stupid, and he's allowing this seems to be a kind of cleric taking out the lotus spiritual symbol from his head and putting it on there, and he's assisted by a friar with a symbol of the baptism by water. Now, this woman here on this side, I would think is probably a Cathar, and this refers to the ceremony of the consolamentum, in which they used a book, the secret book, I think. And anyhow, they also used a table. So I think it's a reference to Catharism, which he hasn't chosen. And this is Bosch's well-known drawing and painting, The Death of the Miser. Now, if we look here, the place to look, we won't look at the actual death of the miser, not really relevant this time, but at the top, in the painting, if you look really carefully, you might see this tiny little figure, but basically you don't see it. It doesn't show. But if you look at the drawing, it could definitely be a Cathar symbol. It has the same cross. It looks very much like that as a head, and it looks very much like a Cathar symbol of Jesus. But it does show up in the drawing, and I'm comparing it to this that we've already seen. And it isn't visible in the painting unless you look really closely. Now, this is a full view of a picture, so you can see Bosch's paintings were very complicated, and I'm only looking at certain details from them. And in this case, I'm looking at this detail, which is rather beautiful, really, and looks very much like the Cathar vision of the universe. So there's brambles and a kind of stony block at the bottom with a wicked creature looking at him. He also often has an owl, which I think is his symbol of God the Father, Satan, identified with God the Father of the earth, Jehovah. Here it seems to be a mouse, but it's the same idea of a wicked creature looking out from this earth symbol. Then above we have this sort of circle of brambles, which I take as to be a symbol of Satan's Eden. And then above we have the cosmos that we've already seen, a figure going up through stars, and then stars on the moon. And this, I've got a closer view of it, but you can see it's the same kind of thing as this head. Very similar. So it's probably I'm sure it is actually the entrance to the land of light. And this very famous picture by Bosch definitely seems related to this because it's the same sort of series of circles in a tunnel leading to the land of light. So this land of light is a destination of the saved, and the saved would be people who had received the spiritual baptism or consolamentum and been purified. Now, if you sort of relapsed again and still wanted to go back to earth, then you wouldn't be able to enter this land of light. But if you stayed, kept your separation from the earth, then you could join and go in. And I think once you were in, you stayed in this real paradise or real heaven. Here's another picture where we can compare this figure in the Orant position to this stekak. Stekak is the single for steki. This is this symbol of the entrance to the tunnel certainly shows that Bosch must have had a mystical side, as he's normally known for his demons and devils, but he had another side, and he must have had some experience of this, of something mystical and maybe of the land of light in order to paint this picture. However, most people didn't make it to the land of light, and they fell back to earth, which is actually Bosch's entrance to the Empyrean that we just saw, and this are two panels from 4 in Venice. This one shows, this is just two visions of the same scene, one in color, one in black and white. But I hope it's easy to make out that they're falling down back to the earth, and they fall through clouds, which isn't the normal fall to hell that people interpret this as. Anyhow, they're falling through clouds, and another panel that I didn't include shows them landing in hell, but in fact, Cathars considered the earth to be hell, so that fits with the same story. Now, this is another image of a different fall. This is the original fall of the human souls. So for the Cathars, humanity's early fall happened in 2 stages. The first stage is the fall of the souls from heaven, and the second one would be their temptation and later falls back to earth from the higher levels. But in this picture, they're shown in the first one where they fall together with the rebel angels, who Bosch shows as turning into demons. And they blend into the earth and into the sea as they fall. But these birds flying with them would be the human souls, often shown as little birds in art and also by Bosch. And there are many in this in his panel paintings. This is the full view of his left wing of his picture. This Haywing triptych, which you can see in Madrid. And here's a close-up of it. One, it's the same thing, but one is black and white photo. Anyhow, there's this really peculiar fountain of life. And in front of it is God the Father, i.e. Jehovah, creating Adam and Eve, or creating Eve from Adam's rib. It's rather complicated the way the Cathars viewed this, because they thought that all the souls became one soul in Adam and Eve, in Adam and Eve, but then they reproduced again as humanity multiplied. And so all the souls of the birds are uniting at the stage in the bodies of Adam and Eve. And this creator God is shown by his clerical headgear to have an association with the church. So he's a sort of a satanic creator, and behind him, the fountain of, I think, physical life, it would be, is like a parody. The hat is a sort of parody of the little hat of this cleric, and the robe, he's got a sort of protrusion that's equivalent to this. He has a sort of robe, but it is a very odd picture of the fountain of life. Apparently, the people who looked at Bosch's painting just took it all as a joke, and they didn't think of him as a heretic. That's how he escaped the Inquisition himself. Then this is his very famous Garden of Earthly Delights, which I'll show you some of, but you can see how complicated it is. But I think that the whole thing really is 3 episodes in the history of Satan's Eden. So this would be the beginning where the creation had the human souls have already fallen. They've entered the bodies, and um, they're introduced or married, it's thought, by Jesus, but there's a little more to it than that. Um, and on the right, in the middle, there's the same Eden in the present day where everybody is enjoying themselves before they fall back to earth. And the right, which I'm not going to cover, is hell, which is probably the hell that the Cathars believed would happen at the end of the world. This was something mentioned in the Cathars secret book. But now, before we go on, I just want to point out, I think this is a really excellent image of a giraffe, which you don't see in Netherlandish art. Far better. Nobody seemed to have an idea of what a giraffe looked like in the Netherlands or anywhere else north of the Alps. Bosch has a perfect image of a giraffe, and I think that's a bit of evidence that he was in Venice, where you could see images of giraffes. And this is an interesting scene from the background of the left wing, where birds are flying in and out of complicated rocks, which I think again represents the physical world. So they go back to Satan's Eden, then they go back into the rocks and born again. Here, entering an egg is the same sort of symbolism, born in the physical world. And there they are again, a closer view. And now, here's the giraffe again. And in this fountain, you can see it rests on mud, which has jewels in it. And again, it's looked at by this owl, symbol of the creator, Satan. I think these might be bodies, these tubes of glass, which he uses fairly often. And anyhow, some people compare it to alchemy, symbol of the body. But these jewels in the mud, I think, are significant because they, I think, represent souls fallen to earth. And then from here, there are a lot of little demons that enter into a sort of hole in this rock. I don't know if it shows up in this view, because I can't see the whole view. But anyhow, they're going to earth. They've been created in Eden, Satan's Eden, and now they're heading towards earth. Again, very few, if any, other artists have painted Eden with demons in it. It's as far as I know, it's only Bosch. And to have that must mean something again. Anyhow, they're all heading towards the earth where they're going to take over. And now this scene is significant because why would Jesus be taking part in this activity? So that is a bit hard to explain, but I think you can interpret it. Jesus is or the person who introduced Adam to Eve and Eve to Adam is described in the secret book as a beautiful young man. So you can interpret it that way. Anyhow, the secret book also says that Satan's face became the color of red-hot iron. It's certainly shown as red in this picture. And notice there's a rabbit behind Eve here. Again, that's another symbol of lust, which and reproduction, which the Cathars did not think was a good thing, because every new birth embedded the souls more into the earth. And again, these figures are surrounded by demonic monsters, which I think must be a symbol, going into a pond. And now we have the central panel, which I certainly won't be able to cover. But you can see here, they're a bit elongated, but figures doing all sorts of things. All of the things that they would have left behind had they wanted to go to higher levels, but they're attracted to the earth. And this is interesting. In the background, there are these four, people interpret them as gates into Eden. And when you look closely, there are a surprising number of little figures, like here climbing up, or this is almost made of little figures of the same color. And here we've got acrobats. They're creatures flying around. So Bosch had a really impressive imagination. And then here we see a circle of animals going around a pond. Now that, again, is an image of reproduction. And the wheel of birth and death, and I'm comparing it to the Kolo, which was a round dance. And also in the background, notice this creatures or figures going into an egg. Again, another symbol of birth. And here are some pictures of the writers. Bosch, when he wanted to be, when he wasn't doing demons, he could do really beautiful pictures of animals, as you see here. So all the men are circling around the women in the center. Now in the bottom, I don't have the, I'd have to go back. Maybe I should. I think, well, I won't in case we don't have time, but in the central panel, there's a very small group of figures, and only one of them is aware that there's a higher level. You see, all the others surrounding him are really baffled, like really confused. They have no idea what he's talking about when he points upwards. And so I think that's Bosch's way of showing that humanity is not yet ready to go to the highest level. So that's it for now. I think that leaves some time for questions.